Hello, this is Stabilizing the Economy Section B lecture. Our prioritized standard is Economic Standard 37. Objectively, we're going to compare and contrast classical economics, demand-side economics, the Austrian School of Economics, supply-side economics, and monetarism. Since the publishing of The Wealth of Nations in 1776 by Scottish economist Adam Smith, that name should probably ring a bell, classical economics, sometimes referred to as laissez-faire economics, dominated economic theory. Now, classical economics argued that without government regulation, the economy would self-regulate. Under classical economics, the U.S. government would not intervene in the economy, even when suffering from economic depressions, which were sometimes referred to as panics. Now, classical economics had dominated the U.S. economy until the Great Depression. Although, as the Great Depression struck, Keynes theorized in his book, General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, that the economy did not actually self-regulate, which was very different than what economists like Adam Smith suggested would happen. And he also suggested that government intervention could actually help an economy during recessions or depressions for that matter. The work of British economist John Maynard Keynes laid the groundwork for demand-side economics, which is sometimes called Keynesian economics. Demand-side economics focuses on achieving economic stability and growth through the government's influence on aggregate demand, believing that the amount of consumer spending basically depends on people's disposable income, which is actually income that's available to be spent or invested after all taxes have been paid. Meaning if you want people to spend more money based on the idea of demand-side economics, you give them more disposable income. And if you want them spending less money, well, you give them less disposable income. So if the government does things to put more money in your pocket, then therefore it could possibly speed up the economy. For instance, to speed up the economy, the government should increase people's disposable incomes. So do things that might put more money in their pockets. So that would cause aggregate demand to shift to the right. And by it shifting to the right, X marks the spot. We're going to notice the upside to this, because as we know, there's always a downside. The upside is more jobs. Production levels increase, which probably means more jobs. Downside, yeah, you're probably going to have more inflation. Keynes was fully aware of that. He was fully aware. Also, with demand-side economics, they also say that to slow down the economy, the government should decrease people's disposable incomes, meaning do things that takes money out of the pockets of consumers. So therefore, that would cause your aggregate demand to shift to the left and decrease. By it decreasing, X marks the spot. The upside is, hey, inflation rates have gone down. Prices aren't going to be up as high. Although there is going to be a consequence to that, there is going to be some decline in total production and therefore job levels. Keynes advocated that the goals of stabilizing the economy through demand-side economics could be accomplished through both fiscal policy and monetary policy. Austrian economist Friedrich Hayek disagreed with Keynes, believing that any attempt by the government to intervene during an economic downturn would just reduce the private sector's ability to correct itself. Hayek felt that after the government provided some basic guidelines to allow the economy to function, which he thought included things like creating a legal system of property rights, that the government should basically just step out of the way and let the market take care of everything else. So again, kind of this idea of laissez-faire economics. Hayek felt that the best a government could do was lower taxes and reduce government spending, thus encouraging private businesses to provide the items consumers demanded, rather than the government actually providing those items for consumers. Hayek opposed virtually all regulation of the private sector, including he was opposed to minimum wages, environmental regulations, workplace safety laws, government pensions, unemployment benefits, welfare payments, or any other measurements of the government to redistribute wealth. So basically, like the villain of every Disney movie. Hayek argued that by minimizing the government's role in the economy, a nation would be more likely to recover swiftly from an economic downturn. American economist and Ronald Reagan economic advisor Arthur Laffer developed an economic theory known as the Laffer curve that suggested that by lowering tax rates, the government could actually increase its tax revenues, which led to the creation of what's called supply-side economics, which sometimes is referred to as trickle-down economics. Now, supply-side economics focuses on achieving economic stability and growth by attempting to increase the economy's aggregate supply, or real GDP, with supporters arguing that the economic growth is going to be best achieved through giving incentives for business owners, or rich people, to increase production. So, like supplies or demand side economics is concerned with aggregate demand. If you're talking supply side economics, they are only concerned with supply. So, what their logic is to speed up the economy, they basically say that the government should increase incentives for businesses to expand. So do things so that business owners have more money in their pockets. And their logic is by doing that, they will be inspired by all the extra money that they now have, and they will invest that money in a business. And by investing that money in a business, X marks the spot. That's going to show us a couple things. It's going to show us that, hey, look at this. Inflation monster is dead. We killed it. Whoa! It's dead now. Yes. And also, total production levels have increased, which means more jobs. Yeah, we did it. We killed them both. Whoa! I'd have a victory lap if I was there with you right now. So this model predicts both a decrease of inflation and unemployment. So some of you might be thinking, this sounds awesome. Why do we totally not just do this and only do this? Funny thing. So let's pretend, just for instance, that maybe we have like a massive national debt. And we can't afford to just keep giving money to rich people so that they might accidentally make a job. So we have to not give them a tax cut. And then all of a sudden, our aggregate supply actually starts to shift to the left. So by shifting to the left, I'm sure nothing bad will happen. Well, oh dear. Well, inflation rates have increased. Guess who's back? Back again. Inflation's back. Tell a friend. Well, at least unemployment's going to bail us out here. So our total production levels have actually dropped, which means guess who's back? Back again. Unemployment's back. Tell a friend. Oh no, we created a monster, guys. Not only do we have high inflation, we also now have high unemployment. So stagflation is basically what would happen if you do this. So aggregate supply is awesome in theory as long as you are always giving tax cuts and money to rich business owners. But the second you stop doing that, basically the whole thing kind of explodes on you. So again, to reiterate with the supply side economics, if the government decreases business incentives, not only will the unemployment rate increase, but so will inflation. So basically the whole logic of supply side economics basically corners itself into a situation where they always want to keep giving rich business owners more and more money. Because if they don't do that, then basically the whole thing explodes. Now, critics of supply side economics question two major assumptions of supply side theory. So this is kind of the idea of trickle-down economics. You give rich people money, and then they'll have so much that their cup will spilleth over, and therefore people below them get more money, and then their cups will spilleth over, and then eventually everybody got money. Yeah! Whoa! Although critics say this model does not actually predict the economic behaviors of people. So the idea that, hey, you're going to have all this money and it's going to trickle down. What we've actually noticed, and if you remember back to a previous unit when we talked about economic inequality, the rich just get richer and richer and richer. The people below them don't actually ever get any of that money. For instance, Reaganomics, he gave massive tax cuts. He was anticipating this was going to inspire individual and business investment. What it actually did was just cause the aggregate demand to increase, and therefore inflation rate went up. So the people that are fans of this, when they actually do it, sometimes something completely different happens. Also, critics argue that tax cuts and government spending cuts are administered unfairly. So once we started to see the introduction of trickle-down economics, we also started to notice that the top people, their income massively increased, and the rest of the people's income not so much. Now, these tax cuts that are paying for the sweetheart tax cuts for all the rich people disproportionately are favoring the wealthy, and the spending cuts fell most heavily on social programs that affected the poor, the unemployed, and the otherwise economically disadvantaged. So again, 1947 to 79, it's not that it's perfectly evenly spread out, but the money was pretty well spread out to all groups. And then supply-side economics happened, and then basically the people at the top basically benefited the most, and everybody else really hasn't benefited at all since we have started to embrace supply-side economics. The work of American economist, you don't hear that often, Milton Friedman, in his book, A Monetary History of the United States from 1867 to 1960, sounds like an amazing page-turner, laid the framework for a school of economic thought known as monetarism. Now, monetarists argue that the main cause of inflation is an excess money supply. So he argued that there was too much money chasing too few goods. And they advocate that the goal of monetary policy should be to achieve price stability. They commonly advocate for tight money policies to try to keep inflation down. Monetarists suggest the Fed target the growth rate of the money supply to equal the growth rate of real GDP, which will leave prices constant. So how their economic theory works is, so let's say this represents the aggregate supply growth over the course of a year. So basically what they think that the Fed should do, the Federal Reserve, is have the money supply, the increase of the money supply, try to mirror that as much as humanly possible. So by it mirroring that as much as humanly possible, the logic is price levels will stay about the same. Not much difference at all, possibly even a decline, but pretty much about the same. So if you keep it about the same level, prices won't go up. And an added benefit if you do that is total production levels actually will increase, which probably means more jobs because products don't make themselves. Monetarists actually generally reject fiscal policy in favor of monetary policy. Monetarists think you shouldn't waste your time with fiscal policy at all. It'll just mess everything up. Monetarist theory is expressed using the equation of exchange, which is MV equals PQ, with MV, meaning the stock of money and the velocity of circulation, representing the total amount spent by buyers. So this is what buyers are doing. And PQ, which is price times quantity, representing the total amount received by sellers. So since consumers buy from producers and producers sell to consumers, basically what happens on each side should be the same. Monetarists believe that velocity of circulation are generally fixed and therefore predictable. Therefore, they suggest that there is a direct relationship between the money supply
and the prices or quantity. Now, probably should point out in practice, velocity has not actually proven to be constant. As inflation rates decline, people have tended to spend less money, thereby causing the velocity to actually decrease. So basically, their entire logic is flawed because they assume that this is going to be at a constant rate. But as you see over time, it is not constant at all. It goes up and it goes down. But the logic using the equation of exchange is that if there is a change in one of the variables, then there must be a change in one of the other variables to keep MV equal to PQ. So based on their logic, they basically say that velocity of circulation is basically a non-factor because that doesn't change. So basically, if you want the price levels to decline, then basically that means money supply has to decline also. So that's the entire thing.
All right, that concludes Stabilizing the Economy Section B lecture. Our prioritized standard again was Economic Standard 37. And objectively, now you can compare and contrast classical economics, demand side economics, the Austrian School of Economics, supply side economics, and monetarism.